what I would see as a potential issue with this standard and people adhering to the standard is a supply chain. It's okay getting your obsolescence management structure solid within the business that you work in, but most businesses require the support of a supply chain, both upstream and downstream. So how on earth is that managed from inside your own organization? How do we ensure that people are within your supply chain are adhering to these standards? And, how does that contracting work?
The requirements that are placed on you from your client, you would roll those down to your supply chain or through your supply chain. The issue you may have will depend on how big an organization is to whether they can manage obsolescence, because you could end up with a man in a shed or for that person to respond to the obsolescence demands could be quite costly, and so they probably won't adhere to them. So you need to look at ways that you can support your supply chain with information and organisation to allow item availability information or risk information to come back into you. Now that could be through various tools like Diamond OM or even something like Project Workshare.
The contracting obsolescence, as Tim said, is really dependent on what you're looking to put down your supply chain. IEC 62402 2019 does have an element in it that requires or provides guidance on how you can do some of the supply chain contracting. 62402 2019 actually doesn't cover contracting, but it does cover the use of the supply chain. And one of the things that we've been involved in, and I've been involved in, I think I've assessed over 180 companies now, is doing a supplier assessment to look at whether a supplier or manufacturer, or in 62402 2019 terms speak, a contractor, can comply with your requirements for obsolescence. And normally, again, dependent on the size of the piece of equipment they're producing, you would look to see an obsolescence management plan from the supplier, and with that would be the supporting obsolescence risk analysis. And again, that would form part of your OMP and how you're going to manage your supply chain in your OMP and in your certain extent policy as well. The issues that you put down to your supplier would obviously have to flow through to you so that you can then understand the risk to your projects. The supplier assessment that we use in Allen Webb is based on what was then the UK MOD's Tomcat tool question set. We've actually expanded that, and we would look to see risk analysis and evidence of risk analysis from the suppliers that we engage in that. Tim's quite right. You wouldn't expect a small supplier to produce that. You wouldn't expect a small supplier of a very small equipment to produce an OMP. But anything of significance, the supplier or the contractor or the manufacturer should provide you with an OMP and a risk assessment with updates on an agreed basis with you as the customer.
So the accreditation guidelines, whose responsibility is it? Let's say that someone within the supply chain didn't comply with this accreditation. Who's responsible? Is it you as a business, or is it them as a supplier? Does it all come back onto you?
In essence, basically, the accreditation will be dependent on the contract you have with the supplier and how you've got contracted to you from your customer. But at the end of the day, you as the owner of the product you're delivering, it's your name that delivers it. So therefore, and I hate the term brand, but the brand and any sort of criticism comes back to you, irrespective of what happens in the supply chain, irrespective of what penalty clauses you may have with a supplier. So it is basically the deliverer of the customer who actually has to face the issues about any poor supply.
I would suggest accreditation is the wrong word, because you're not accredited like you are, like ISO 9001 in the quality management system, that you reach a standard. So it's more of a contractual requirement that's placed on the prime, who then flow that down to down the supply chain. But one of the key elements that we are seeing within 2019 is the resilience of the supply chain, as David's already articulated. What is that risk and how are you managing that risk? And what we're seeing, certainly in some of the clients that we're dealing with, is the lack of experience to understand what that risk is to the supply chain and what that impact would be to the production schedule and delivery of product.
So in an ideal world, when you're contracting for your supply chain, you would look at them having this standard, wouldn't you? The IEC 62402 2019. That would be in an ideal world, wouldn't it?
That's absolutely right. You would want to put that in your contract, that they will manage to that standard.
Okay.
And as you select your suppliers to support your program, then when you're conducting your supplier audit from a finance perspective and performance perspective, you'd also look at the way that the supplier manages information and item risk and resolutions from an obsolescence perspective.